we started, see that? We started that Stan. So tonight, I have Stan. Stan, tell me a little about yourself.
You put me on the spot.
What?
I say, now you're putting me on the spot.
Oh.
What do you want to know?
I can't remember your last name.
Spees.
Spees.
I could have made something up. I missed it again.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
You're on a roll, just keep going.
Yeah, see. Stan, you're a lawyer, right?
Yes, sir.
Oh, scary.
Harmonicist.
And a harmonicist.
I made up that word.
Harmonica.
Oh, yes.
Now, wait a minute, he plays the dobro.
Dobro?
I still don't know what that is.
I don't have a dobro with me.
No dobro with her. But tonight we're going to give
I just like saying dobro.
a story about Arkansas and my adventure in Arkansas many, many years ago. So Stan's going to accompany me and give me background music as I tell about my adventure in the Ozarks. Stan, start. Years ago, when I was a young man, I went to Pensacola for some training, become an officer and a gentleman. Well, I finished, and a friend of mine and we decided we were going to travel the roads going back to Ohio, to his place, and Minnesota and mine. Well, we headed out. We figured we were going to wear our brand new uniforms because we might pick up some chicks. And we were real excited about it. And we drove along, and we, of course, as most male adventurers that wear uniforms, we resulted in zero attraction. However, as we were driving along, we saw this enlisted fellow on the side of the road, and we said, man, that guy looks cool. We're going to have to give him a ride. Officers do that, you know. So we picked him up. And we said, where you going, fella? And we were driving. He says, I'm going back in the holler. I got a girl back there. I says, the holler? Yeah. Back in the Ozarks. Wow. I looked over at my buddy, John Thurn. I said, what do you think, John? Wouldn't that be an adventure? He looks at me, he shakes his head at me, he says, man, that would be an adventure. So we look back, this guy's in the back seat, and so, give us directions, we're heading there with you. So we took off. Remember, this is way back, late 50s, early 60s, 40-some years ago. And we drove over hill and yarn, and we looked around, and man, this was backwoods. Every place we drove along, they had a porch. And most everyone was swinging there. We saw kids playing around. I'm sure when I think about it now, Hilly and Billy Clinton were amongst them. But we just kept going along, and man, we got lost. But we just would ask and ask. And we drove by this little place that had a little tree and a little house. We didn't think much of it, but with his directions, we went another 2 or 3 miles. I said, we're going too far. So we stopped, and there was these nice people up on the swing. So we stopped. We said, where's Old Holler Post Office? They looked down at us and they said, you missed it by 5 miles. It was that little house with a tree in front. So we drove back to 5 miles. And we looked, and sure enough, right behind the old tree was a mail box with a little sign on top saying U.S. Post Office. So we went in. And we talked to the postmaster there, and we said, we're looking for Jane Farrell. And she says, oh, she's supposed to be one of the Farrell kids. I said, well, how do we get to him? He says, you go 5 miles down the road with some old people on the side of the road there, and you go about 300 feet more, and you see a turnoff to the right. He says, you can tell, he says, because every once in a while they got some spokes where one of the kids takes a bike into it. It's real hard to spot. So we went all the way back as cool guys and waved at our friends who we had forgot to ask for the actual people because they could have pointed across the road. Took the side road off, and it was just 2 ruts with grass growing up in the middle. And we said, Jesus, this is terrible. Tell us more about this Jane. Oh, she says, I really think I'm in love with her. I says, what are you going to do? She says, oh, I'm going to bring her into town. I'm going to put her to work, and I'm going to retire. We looked at each other like, what's going on here? Oh, well, let's keep going down the road. So we headed down, and we went, and we went. We went up hills and down hills. Finally, we were almost ready to turn around, and we saw this cabin up ahead. We says, that's where the Jane must be. So we headed up there, and John and I looked at the front, and in the front was the most beautiful girls I had ever seen, and they were in Daisy May outfits. For those that are older, they know what Daisy May's like. But for those that are younger, they were spectacularly dressed. Skimpy. And so we got out, we walked up, we say, who's Jane? And they looked at us sort of queer, and all of a sudden from the back, out of the door, we see a double-barrel shotgun come out, and this guy comes out and says, who are you guys? And we shivered and we walked back. And then we looked at him and said, we're looking for Jane Farrell. Please, sir. He says, you stay away from here. These are my girls. And he must have been 65, 70 at the earliest. Well, we looked at our friend, and we got where our bravery was. We sort of stood behind him and let him talk. And he said, you got to go down further into the holler. And he says it's about 4 or 5 miles. Oh, we said, okay. Well, we're this far. So we drove our car, and we went over hills. We went through streams. And it was lucky it was dry because the streams went all the way up to the running board. And then all of a sudden we came over this hill. And down in front of us was this beautiful valley. It was beautiful. And they had out there, they had a farm laid out. And they had a home that looked like it was one room. And we said, wow. Must be, you know, man and woman and Jane. Well, we drove down there, and no one was out. I don't know if they all hid when we came, I don't know. But we pulled in, and we sent our young friend to go get Jane, because he was going to introduce us. And so we sat there in the car because we weren't going to get out this time. Not with a remembrance of a shotgun from about an hour before. So he went up and he knocked, and this young boy came out, and he ran back in. And then he came back and said, we're going to introduce you to all of the family. And we looked at each other, what's this all of the family? So he went in there, and they started walking out by age and height. And we looked, and we thought there would be 2 or 3 because of this This house was really small. Your bedroom is large compared to that, Melinda. And they started coming out. And they got a little kid, the next size, and the next size. There were 10 of them. Then the 11th came out. And there were some pretty girls in there. There were some really pretty girls. And then the Ma and Pa came out. And we looked and we said, how do they get into that place? Oh, well, it'd be nice meeting them. And we looked at our young man, and we were waiting for him to grab one of those pretty girls that was about 18 and come over and introduce it. And he said, Jane, come over and I want to introduce you to my friends. And the girl about 9 or 10 years old comes over. And we looked and we said, Jane? And we looked at each other and said, this is scary. This is something I don't know in the universe. And John looked at me and says, I don't know this either. So we looked at each other and said, well, I'll tell you what, our young friend, we called him Admiral. Admiral, we've got to go. We have an appointment in Ohio in about 13 hours, and we got to keep driving. So we'll say hi to everyone. Hi, everyone. We went and shook their hands. We got in the car, and we took off. And we took off. We looked at that house with those 2 girls still sitting in the front, and we just drove right by. And that was our Ozarks adventure. Thank you. Thank you, Stan. That was wonderful.
Especially my old Kentucky home.